And before we start the official meeting, I think it might be helpful if I just go through the order of proceedings for the call-in, because as I've said, it's a long time since we've had a call-in, and also there are new committee members, new councillors. So, the scope, which has been tabled, and you should all have that now, will form the guide for debate throughout the meeting, and I will shortly be asking the committee's approval of this document. I'd also like to remind you that if any of our debate drifts into the exempt appendices, this will need to be discussed in the closed part of this meeting. I will then ask the lead secretary, Councillor Chenchi, to present her case for the call-in and why we, the committee, should scrutinise the decision. And Councillor Chenchi, you will have up to a maximum of 10 minutes. I will then ask the portfolio holder, Councillor Ellesmere, to present the reasons why the decision was made by executive, and again you will have up to a maximum of 10 minutes. The committee will then be given the opportunity to question the lead signatory and the portfolio holder. It's normal at this stage of proceedings for the committee to be given the opportunity to ask officers and any other witnesses to provide further information and to answer questions, but no witnesses have been called, and consequently the officers here tonight are here in a supportive role as opposed to actually being asked questions. If there is any new or additional information that comes tonight, further questions may be asked of the lead secretary and the portfolio holder. I will also at this point ask whether any of the committee have questions that may relate to the closed part of the agenda, and should this be the case, a motion to exclude the public will have to be proposed. The lead secretary and the portfolio holder will be asked to summarise their cases within a 5-minute timescale. Both councillors will then lead the meeting, as both are members of the executive and must not take part in any debate on the course of the action to be taken. I will then ask the committee to take one of the following courses of action: to refer the decision back to the executive, to refer the decision to council to debate the observations of this meeting, and council would then be required to refer their decision back to executive. Any motion must be proposed and seconded, and only one motion can be debated at any time. If that motion is lost, the committee can continue with the other option available to us until all are exhausted, and then the original decision will be upheld and implemented immediately by default. Should we resolve to refer the matter back to executive or council, then we must agree on observations as to why it is being referred. So I hope that explanation helped, because I remember when I first became councillor, Councillor Firm was chair of this committee, he always explained that very carefully. So we can now go to...
I'll ask a question.
Yes,
in the Constitution, there is an outline of the various stages through which O&S call-in goes. We are at stage 3. And in the Constitution, which is the Borough Council Constitution, not just the overview and scrutiny, in fact there are 3 options open to us. The first of which, and it's on page 4.65 of the Constitution, the first of the options open to us is to allow the decision to be implemented without further delay. The second one is to refer to executive, and the third one is to refer to council. And it's our responsibility to decide which of those 3 options is open to us.
Thank you, Chair. Regrettably, we may have no version of the Constitution.
Well, that's very sad.
The current version of the Constitution, which was agreed at Council in March, I think, of this year, at 476, sets out the following courses of action available to Strategic Oversight and Scrutiny Committee. 1, to refer the decision to a meeting of the executive, and 2, to refer the decision to the council. It then says the committee only has the above 2 options available to it. If the committee decides not to refer the decision to executive or to council, then all the options available to the committee will have been exhausted, and the decision taken by the portfolio holder or executive will be implemented without further delay.
So you effect is more or less
It's
the
the
Are we all happy to proceed? Right, so if I could have apologies for that, please.
It's all the councillors not here, they've all got substitutes. So, Councillor, shall I go through them all around each of them? Councillor Ross, I'm acting substitute for. Councillor Wright, Councillor Crowborough is subbing for. Councillor Goonan, Councillor Studd is substitute for, and Councillor Riley, Councillor Hopkins is substitute.
Any declarations of interest? And item 3 then is rather necessary anyway, so I think we can move straight to item 4, which is the calling. So as we discussed, the scope has been tabled, and I can confirm that in accordance with the Constitution, I have agreed this beforehand with the lead signatory and the monitoring officer. And then I would therefore like to ask for your approval of the scope, which will form the guide for the case.
Agreed.
Are we all happy with that? Thank you very much. Councillor Gibson, welcome to the meeting. And can I ask you to present the case with the calling and why this committee should scrutinise the decision? And you have 10 minutes.
Time starts now. First of all, can I say thank you to everybody for your time because you're an O&S. Because I know that time is precious. Thank you for your time here. This call is about the process and scrutinising of the Labour Group's decision on buying the Argyle building and leasing to a community group. It is not about the actual buying of the building, so I won't be referring to the papers. I've been told that the price is a good price, and I'm happy that everything to do with the financial side we agree with. Neither is it about the Bangladeshi Support Group, who I admire greatly. They do a lot of good work. This could have been the WI, the Salvation Army, the Scout Group. It could have been anybody. I still would have called it in. This has nothing. It's not a personal thing. It's about the principle and whether Ipswich residents think this is a fair, open, and reasonable process. So I'm going to start with the scope, and I'm doing it in the order that the scope has been written. I think that some of the answers that I had at Executive were not to my satisfaction, in particular the one about the lease being 15 years. I know that there are other organisations who wanted to take longer terms, and I was told that on this particular occasion the lottery grant that they're bidded for might be in danger had they not had the support of a 15-year lease. However, in the past, I know that other organisations have been told that it wasn't possible to do that, but the council would be happy to support a lottery bid by giving assurances that should they get it, they would be happy possibly to extend the lease. Therefore, that eliminates the risk to the council. If we adopt a policy in practice, as far as I'm concerned, then it becomes our policy, whether it's written or not. I did actually have trouble trying to find where we had a policy that said 5 years. Councillor Ellesmere also mentioned that Executive and confirmed that that was normal, that was our policy. I'm also concerned for the Bangladeshi group. I think there is a risk financially. We're assuming that they're going to get the lottery bid. That isn't necessarily the case. We're assuming that they're going to be able to pay their rent. That isn't necessarily the case. And on the risk management, I want to refer you to the paper we've been given for tonight. On page 8, the risk management, which I think is section 6, the fourth point down, which says the tenant has financial difficulties and becomes insolvent. The actions to mitigate the risks are written as BSC is an established and well-organised group who have good rent payment history with IBC. This is not an action to mitigate the risk. This is a description of why the probability of risk has been set at 3. So it's a duplication of the columns. And I feel that there should have been a part in there in the actions to mitigate risk that actually gave us some reassurance, so I'm not reassured. The second paper also has a matrix, and I think that's section 5. Yes, the policy, it's number 3. The terms and availability of council assets for use by voluntary and community organisations may not be applied on a consistent basis across the community. That's a risk, and ensure appropriate policies are in place. Well, I feel that in this particular instance, we are not showing the public and the residents that we are consistent, and I think this has come out of the norm. The speed in which it came to executive as well, which required the chair to give permission for it to go on executive, the fact that there are purple papers, I do not feel that it is open. I'm also worried about the Bangladeshis, if they have difficulty paying rent, that they rely on the organisations that are going to come into the building. One, I do not see where this is being monitored, who's responsible, can they decide who sublets the building, do we decide, this is actually a question, Councillor can answer. Do we decide who's going to sublet? Is there going to be a cost versus benefit scenario where we will understand those organisations that are going into the building? And if they're going to rely on some of that to bring in an income, are any of those organisations going to come back to us and apply for a grant for their rent, in which case we're still paying for it? Will the Bangladeshi Support Centre come to us at any point and ask for a grant process, which completely obliterates the need to pay back the loan to buy the building in the first place? I did ask a question today which I had an answer about 15-year lease compared to 5. How would that legally affect us? Will it cost us more? And I've been assured that the total sum is £40 extra for it being 15 years rather than 5. But I'm still not totally certain about that in its entirety, but I'm going to accept that one. I also want to ask the question of why number 4, option 4 wasn't considered, which meant we bought the building and then we did a competitive process. If the Bangladeshi Centre are in dire need and it's taken ages to find a building, I cannot see them turning around and saying, sorry, we back out now, so therefore we've lost your insurance. They would have waited in a competitive process, like those done by others, CSB, when they got the Crown Court, they had to go through a competitive process, and I think that's fair to other organisations. I know the Chinese, perhaps even the Caribbean Association, may have loved to have had an opportunity to bid for this building, and we're not giving them that. How do the residents see that? How do other organisations? So what reasonable assurances will we have on the sublets? I'm also worried that because they're going to have to comply with their lease, and part of that is to have other organisations, are they just going to have anybody because it costs them to comply with their lease? We don't know what financial situations around the corner, anything could happen, and I feel that the whole thing has been done a little bit behind closed doors, very speedily, without proper scrutiny. So I'd like to ask this committee to consider it going to council, 1, so that it can be properly debated with all councillors, that organisations can come along and ask questions, and if they all feel that this was right and just and it's absolutely fantastic, I have no problem with that. But I feel the council will not be looked upon properly over this, and I would like everybody to have that opportunity, even if at the end of it the same decision is made. So that is what I'm asking for here as a motion. And possibly on top of that, perhaps O&S would like to scrutinise the policy and just see if it can be tightened up a little bit and put some things in place so that this doesn't happen again. Thank you very much.
That's welcome to the meeting. Can I ask you to present the reasons why the decision is made to protect you? And again, you have 10.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just, before I go into the 4 points that Councillor Shenchi raised, just address the issue of the speed with which we had to move on this. There is a shortage of suitable community space in Ipswich. Opportunities do not come up often. And we had to move fast to secure Argyle Street. In actual fact, the main reason why we were able to secure it was that we were able to say that we would be able to exchange and complete by the end of July. That's why it went to executive, and we had to get agreement with the chair of O&S for it to go there. We could have certified that it was urgent decision and exempted it from call-in, but we like to be as open and transparent as we can, so we didn't do that. This is where we are. If we just go through the 4 points, the 15-year lease is not against the council's policy for lets, as the supporting documentation shows. Community use of council assets policy, February 2011. On page 26, paragraph 311, provides for short, medium and long-term lets. The council's constitution gives the property service operations manager delegation to grant leases for up to 21 years, and there are numerous other examples around the town of longer or comparable leases. So, for instance, the Credit Union on Austin Street is 15 years, Suffolk New College at Chantrey Park is 21 years, Transport Museum 25 years, Ipswich YM Rugby Club 24 years. No organisation, either community or commercial, is going to invest in a building or get funding for a 5-year lease. And if we insist on a 5-year lease, then we're basically saying that the council should pay for the upkeep of the building. There is no financial risk to the council if lottery funding is not obtained by the BSC. The executive report makes clear that the premises are in reasonable condition. They are in fact already occupied by the current owners and in use. They've got disabled facilities, fire protection, etc. We are making a small grant for the urgent works that we believe are required, which are to the windows, to ensure that that is done before winter sets in. In my view, having been around the building, I don't believe that this building is in any worse condition than 19 Tower Street. It's possibly better, and it's certainly in better condition than the old Crown Court, which we've let to CSB. The proposal is not dependent on BSC getting lottery funding. There are 2 organisations, BSC being one. Their main partner in this is the Disabled Advice Bureau. BSC was established in 1998. It's been in Tower Street since 1999. DAB was established in 1973. It's occupied 19 Tower Street since 1990. Our payment records only go back to 2005, but I can confirm that since 2005 there has been no problem with either of the 2 rent accounts. In other words, they have always paid their rent on time. Both have established records of gaining external funding. For instance, the Disabled Advice Bureau has recently been granted a £250,000 lottery grant, and it is that, as a result of getting that lottery grant, that they've outgrown 19 Tower Street and require further accommodation. I don't believe this was unfair to other groups, because we didn't have a competitive process. As I've outlined, there was considerable urgency regarding the negotiations to purchase this site, and the back-to-back lease arrangement with BSC significantly reduces any element of financial risk to the council. It provides for an income stream essentially to cover the notion of borrowing costs. The report makes it clear that the lease will require sharing of facilities with other groups, and it also identifies 2 groups that are already working with the Bangladeshi Support Centre. I've already mentioned DAB, Community Force, which is one of the groups that's already in there. I understand there is a 4th group who are in serious negotiations with BSC, and that is Active Lives, who will be well known to many of you. There is no policy provision that requires a competitive process. Sometimes we have one, sometimes we don't. It all depends on the circumstances. But what I have said, and said at executive, is I will make the same offer to any community group as we made to BSC and their partner organisations. If you can identify a building, and if you can pay the rent that will cover the notional borrowing cost of the council, we will do the same sort of deal with you. And 4th item, no consultation or reassurance re-sublets. Again, it does make clear in paragraph 210 of the report that BSC will be required to share facilities, and that I've already identified that these they are working with other groups. In addition, of course, by BSC and DAB moving out of 19 Tower Street, additional community space will be freed up for groups to go in there. And the Chief Executive has confirmed that in the event that he exercises the delegation, given to him recommendation 13.2, he would ensure that the agreements adequately reflect commitments within the report. Due to the timescales which I've already outlined, it wasn't practical to have all these matters fully concluded in time for the Executive Committee. What I would just say, I've undertaken joint visits to Argyle Street with BSC and DAB. They are clearly working very closely together on this project, and I confirmed that in a conversation I had with the Bureau Manager of the DAB on Friday. Chair, it's long been recognised that there's a shortage of community space in Ipswich, and this was recognised by the previous administration which you led, and you also tried to address this issue. I'd like to suggest that the route that this administration has taken has been much more successful. It gives additional space to two long-established and successful organisations, with space for more groups in Argyle Street. It frees up space for smaller groups in 19 Tower Street. The rental income covers the notional cost of borrowing, but in actual fact it's been paid out of capital receipts. So this is actually £20,000 rental income which wasn't budgeted for. There is the likelihood that significant capital investment will be forthcoming. We've got the involvement of more than one community group, so it makes the lease more secure. In the unlikely event that all the community groups operating Argyle Street failed, we would still be able to find tenants, I am sure. In the even more unlikely event that all the community groups in Argyle Street failed and that no other community groups wanted to come into Argyle Street, we've still got a building we own which we can sell and get our money back. Now, compare this to the previous administration's support for the Polish Community Centre in the former grey-green garage, where thousands of pounds were poured down the drain. £125,000 on capital works, much of which paid for by Ipswich Borough Council. Tens of thousands of pounds in rent, £6,500 paid for by Ipswich Borough Council, which was personally authorised by Councillor Chenchi, and I've got the paperwork here. The result of that was a project that was never finished, a community centre that never opened, and the building that is now a car wash. Now, given the mess that Councillor Chenchi personally made of trying to establish a new community centre in Ipswich, and the thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money that she wasted, I would have thought she would recognise what a fantastic deal we managed to get here and would wholeheartedly support this. As I've said, Chair, opportunities to acquire suitable premises like this don't arise often. We had to move quickly, and the reason we were able to secure Argyle Street was because we could complete this before the end of July. Referring this decision back to Council or Executive would obviously take us past that deadline and could potentially jeopardise the entire sale. If that were the case, no community organisation would end up in the building. And on that basis, Chair, I would recommend that committee resolves to allow the Executive decision to be implemented without delay.
I think it would be best if we don't become too personal with each other. This is supposed, first of all, to be a non-political meeting, and I don't like the way you spoke about council changes. I prefer that to the back again.
Chair, it's fully documented.
I
can pass it round. I've got copies enough for everybody here, Chair.
But I just don't want it to happen again. Councillor Devlin, before we go to questions.
Yeah, Chair, that is actually something that really concerns me. You know, I'm sitting here, obviously, like solely by myself. I've got Andrew alongside me, and in all the years I've sat on overview and scrutiny, Councillor Fern, like myself, tried to be non-party political, and the fact that we've not had a call in over a year, says something, and I really do hope that the new people here tonight who are representing overview and scrutiny and their elected people, take a broad view rather than a party political view.
Chair, if I could, Councillor Chenchi started off by saying this was a decision taken by Labour councillors on the Executive.
Well, it was.
which was a statement of fact, which I didn't have any problem with. But equally, it is a statement of fact that Councillor Chenchi personally, and I've got it here, I will pass it round just so everybody can see it, Chair, personally agreed £6,500 to be spent on a community centre that never ever happened.
Now, I think what I think has happened now is we're taking away the subject that we were here to discuss.
Yeah.
Now, if this is something you just want to continue, because Councillor Cook and Councillor Can have put their hands up, I'm happy to allow those two speakers, and then we'll move on to the questions as the protocol steps. Councillor Cook?
Yeah, I think it's wrong, Chair, for you to suggest that the scrutiny of the activities of this council and its executive is not a political issue. I mean, it clearly is. And, you know, I welcome scrutiny of the administration currently there, as I did previous administration. And, you know, obviously, with the provision of buildings for community groups, there are various ways of doing it. One way of doing it is for us to have the security of ownership of the property, to give a limited security in terms of a lease to an organisation to use that property. Another option is to give grant aid to a body who is renting accommodation from a private landlord in the town, and they have choices, they have different choices. I guess one is about public provision, one is about privatised provision. But they do seem to me to be legitimate political concerns in the way this town's run.
Thank you, Chair. It feels to me as if we're starting to stray into a later part of the agenda, which is about debating the matter at hand. I might suggest, Chair, that we either conclude on the political versus non-political issue without reference to the actual decision, because that's the debate of the committee, and move straight into the questioning of the two councillors who have been.
Let me just bring Councillor Catton, because you did have your hand up, and then we'll call the next.
Not chat about who's right or who's wrong regarding what Councillor Elton or what Councillor Chenchi will say about each other. However, Councillor Cook, I think you are a substitute. I don't think we've been on scrutiny very much in the last few years. Scrutiny is specifically not political. That is the whole point. That is in the annual report every year. And it is difficult because, frankly, we are local politicians. We do tend to like to go off on one sometimes. Maybe go off on a tangent and maybe start saying things that aren't actually strictly relevant to the point. Particularly in performance, this is important. It is difficult for chairmen to actually be forced out. But we're not here to talk about the past. We're not here to talk about what the reds, the blues, the yellows, the greens, and whatever. We're here to talk about calling this out.
Thank you, Councillor Chenchi, if I could ask you to come to the table.
Yeah, sure.
And then we can start the questions. Committee, would anyone like to begin? Councillor Bedman?
Yeah, was it in the report? Was it? There's no like business plan, like what the Bangladeshis are doing. I would say it's all very well buying a building and all that, but I would have thought there would have been, was it some sort of business plan to, was it obviously ensure that we're getting, or they are sustainable. And was it one other point that I'd be interested in? It says about the cost of repair. What are we talking about, the cost of repair? Because in the report it says it's not as much as what maybe it would be, but there's no mention of facts or figures.
Thank you. The next question is for Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, as I identified, both Bangladeshi Support Centre and the Disabled Advisory Bureau have been paying rent to the council for a significant period of time, and have always made their rental payments. Obviously, as we're not in the open agenda, I don't want to go into exactly how much rent they're paying, but given the rent that they're currently paying at 19 Tower Street, and given the involvement of at least one other organisation who is already in Argyle Street and possibly a further organisation, that leads me to believe that we should have no concerns that the amount of rent being levied, those organisations will have any difficulty in making. In terms of the works to the building, as I've said, I believe that this building is in no worse condition than 19 Tower Street, possibly better. Those of you who've been to 19 Tower Street will know it is not in fantastic condition, but is able to be used by community groups. And therefore, in terms of what is desirable to works that need to be done, compared to what is absolutely necessary that needs to be done, I don't believe that there is any absolutely necessary work other than the windows which we've identified that needs to be done for that building to be successfully occupied. Obviously, all the groups who are in there will wish to spend more money on the building to bring it into, hopefully, a better state than 19 Tower Street.
Thanks so much, Jed. There were 4 grounds for this call-in. We've heard quite a bit of evidence from Councillor Ellesmere, which leads me to think that perhaps Councillor Chenchi wished to withdraw the first ground. The first ground was the 15-year lease against council policy for lets. I think we've got evidence in front of it provided tonight, which has told us not only is it not against the policy, but in fact lets of 15 years or indeed longer have been granted on quite a number of occasions. And if we are able to dismiss that item, obviously it reduces the workload of this committee tonight by a quarter.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm not willing to withdraw it, and I'll tell you why. Because Councillor Ellesmere said himself at the executive that normal policy was to only have it for 5 years, and then gave reasons why this one would be different, which I wasn't happy with. Because I still think the sale of the building could have gone ahead without having to commit to a particular group and doing the competitive process after, thus fitting with the timescales at the end of July and still buying the property but doing the competitive process afterwards. And also the examples that he gave for the 15 years are totally acceptable, because why would you have a roughly pitch for just a year? And they need to have it a little bit more than that. Other community groups have asked for extended terms and not had them. So why, in this particular instance, did we think it's absolutely fine? With no exit strategy and no explanation of what I pointed out on the risk matrix. There is no mitigating action in case something happens that's not been foreseen financially. So, no, I will keep that one in there, sorry. Yes.
You said no strategy for exit. Are you talking about strategy by the council for exit?
If they don't comply with their lease, yes.
Surely, if they don't comply with the terms of our lease, and if they don't pay the amounts due on their lease, there'd be a lot, that would have an impact on the legal operation of the lease. Also, if they fail to pay, well, same as you do if anyone fails to, if you fail to pay your mortgage on your home, the building society will take certain actions against you. And that's the way it works. If the organisation has become insolvent, that would automatically, it's a standard term in any lease, that would negate the lease. The lease would cease and the property would revert back to the council.
Is there a question there?
Well, do you understand anything to do with leases?
Thank you. Yes, I do. And the whole reason why I pointed out that matrix at the beginning, why have it in there if it's so obvious to everybody that you would just throw them out? You wouldn't just throw them out. There'd be a process. It says the tenant has financial difficulties and becomes insolvent. The actions to mitigate the risk BSC is an established and well-organised group who have a good rent payment history. But I think that isn't an action to mitigate risk. That is the probability of risk, which is why we've given it 3. It's a description of the probability of a risk. Now, if it's so obvious to everybody and you don't think residents need to see what mitigating actions or what an exit strategy would be if that happened, then why is it in there in the first place? That's the whole point of it, is that we tell taxpayers what we're doing with their money. And if there's a risk, then what we would do if there is a risk.
That's the councillor here, if you wanted to comment.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just struggling to see whether there was any risk matrix attached to £6,500 in rent that Councillor Chenchy agreed to the Police Club, and I don't think there was. But as Councillor Cook has identified, if you agree a lease, if the tenants don't pay it, then they would be evicted, and that is the obvious exit strategy. In terms of mitigation, again, I think I've identified the fact that there are a number of long-standing, good rent-paying organisations who are going in here, and the fact there are a number of organisations rather than just one is a very strong mitigation of risk. So that if any single one of them fails, then that would not take down the whole operation. So I think the risk has been mitigated. As I said, knowing how much rent the organisations are currently paying in rent, and knowing the fact that they have an excellent payment history, I don't think that there is any worry about them paying their rent. But I've got to say, this wasn't the issue that Councillor Chenchy raised in a call. The issue was there a risk if a lottery grant was not forthcoming? And as I've explained, there is no risk if a lottery grant is not forthcoming, because it is entirely separate from the issue of whether the rent can be paid.
Chair, could I just clarify? That is my worry, is if the lottery money is not received and there will be a risk to them financially. Not just about the rent. I'm assuming that they will be able to pay the rent. Perhaps not, but that isn't my worry. My worry is if they don't receive the lottery, to assume that you have won a lottery bid is arrogance at very best. So that is my concern. Thank you.
Excuse me, I didn't realise I was going to get so quickly. Right. Having listened, it seems to me on the 15-year lease, Councillor Ellsworth has answered that question sufficiently. Seems to me on the second item we're calling that Councillor Ellsworth has answered that question sufficiently. And it comes down to an attitude of whether you think that answer is sufficient or not. Because at the end of the day, buying a building that is going to be leased by a third party is always a risk. However, personally, I accept Councillor Ellsworth's view that if things did fall through with Bangladeshi Support Centre, there would be enough tenant. There is a shortage in this type of property. Perhaps it could have been better described in the executive. But ultimately, one of the reasons why the council spends money in the way it does, and not in the way that a commercial organisation does, is actually the council prepared to take a little bit more of that risk to try and make these things happen. Because frankly, a commercial operator wouldn't buy that building, wouldn't enter into the lease with those groups. So it comes down to your attitude to that, I guess. Personally, I think I'm relatively comfortable with that. However, I do actually have two questions. It really comes down to the third and fourth point in the recording that Councillor Chenchy taught. And I'd like a little bit more comfort on this. Councillor Ellsworth described why the decision was made in such a speedy manner. He talked about the financial reasons for that, that it was an opportunity, whatever. I'm completely comfortable with that, all of the financial side of it, whatever. However, I think this is where, and I don't wish to put words in your mouth, but I think this is possibly where Councillor Chenchy is coming from. The financial side of it, the acquisition of the building, the 15-year lease, that all makes sense to me. It's why was it the Bangladeshi Support Centre? Now, I'm not suggesting anything untoward at all, I want to make that clear. But
And those of you that know me a few years know that I'm not the best reader of papers, policies and so on. So there may well be a policy on this somewhere. But is there a decision-making matrix, a policy that determined that it was going to be the next time an opportunity came up about the Bangladeshi Support Centre, which is great? Or is it the case that this is opportunity came up and for various reasons between officers and senior councillors thought that must be a great thing for the Bangladeshi Support Centre? Frankly, either of them are equally good decision-making ways. It's just the way it has been presented, i.e. not really presented in executive papers. Somebody could say that looks a bit unfair. But it's not necessarily the case. I'm just saying, that's where personally I would like a little bit of comfort. Now, and the second point I like to make, or question I like to put, and it's not really covered under calling, so you can rule it out if you wish, Chair, but it's actually, I just want to know if the building's DDA compliant. As far as I'm aware, it isn't. And that actually is an issue that isn't dealt with in the papers. So I guess my questions to Councillor Ellesmere, if that makes sense.
Before I pass over to Councillor, I've been involved with this building, third party, and I have to be careful what I say because of the verbal papers. But fourth, the pupils that were in there under their control were moved out very quickly because it was thought that the building itself was not fit for their purpose, which, okay, that they were permanently single children, so you could say they needed better premises. So to actually say it's in tip-top condition, or it's even a little bit better than Town Street, I'm not quite sure that is completely true. I know both those buildings pretty well, but actually Blackrock's the council.
I don't think I claim that it's in tip-top condition, and anybody who's been around 19 Tower Street and with me saying it's no worse than 19 Tower Street, well, no, that's not necessarily a huge vote of confidence. However, 19 Tower Street is fully occupied at the moment, and it's perfectly acceptable. The current owners of the building have invested money in it since they bought it. There are ramps in there, there are disabled toilets that I've seen, so that works, and it is clearly able to be occupied fairly quickly. Now, if I just go, Councillor, I mean, the one sort of criticism he makes is that the report could have been written better, and I fully accept that, but as I've explained, this was done pretty quickly, so it probably wasn't as good as we all might have hoped. In terms of why Bangladeshi Support Centre, I think we need to recognise that although the main lease is with Bangladeshi Support Centre, actually there are a number of organisations working in it, and in particular Disabled Advice Bureau as well. I mean, they are working as a team on this, and the reason why they were involved was because so Bangladeshi Support Centre are looking to expand their operation. The current building that the current space that they occupy in 19 Tower Street is upstairs. There isn't disabled access, and they do have quite elderly people going up there and monthly pushchairs. Basically, they've been looking for additional buildings for some time, and through the talks that they've had with Lottery were pretty confident that they could get funding to bring somewhere along. So we, as with a number of different community groups, have been in touch with me. BSC being one, have said that could the council identify anywhere that they may be able to use? I mean, there is an assumption that the council has loads of empty properties that are just waiting there for community groups to move into. In actual fact, that's not the case. We've got very, very little in the way of vacant property. But similarly, DAB as well, because of the lottery grant that they've got, they were looking to move out of 19 Tower Street as well, because basically the lottery grant has enabled them to take on more staff. One of the things that they're required to do is an internet type cafe where they give advice to people about how to use IT and so on, and they just simply can't do it in 19 Tower Street. So there were two groups in particular who had already been in touch with the council to say, can you give us some help to find alternative accommodation? And when Argyle Street came up, that was why we had two groups already, well-established groups, who we knew could go into the building. We knew that probably no one community organisation on its own could afford the rent, to pay the notional rent, so we wanted groups that had a track record that could work together. And because of the management structure of 19 Tower Street, all the community organisations work together anyway. They get on well. We know that they can work together. It seemed that was an excellent starting partnership to move into this building and take on the lease. So that's why we want to do it. I mean, quite frankly, if we hadn't been sure that we could have got the rent, then we probably wouldn't have gone ahead with this. We needed to have some assurance that we could have some organisations that could go in there, sign a back-to-back lease, and that's why we had the certainty that we could move quickly. And the other benefit of it, as far as we could see, was that it frees up space in 19 Tower Street, and in particular, given that both organisations, VSC and DAB, have expanded their space. So in other words, they've taken on extra rooms. We could potentially have smaller community organisations who can't afford to pay a huge amount of rent. We could subdivide those rooms again. So it would give, we know that we had to work with some organisations when CAS left the former post office. So they lost their accommodation there. We looked to temporarily host some of those in the town hall, but the idea is that hopefully we could potentially move those into Tower Street. So it seemed to us that we had two organisations that needed to move out of our existing premise that we had a long-term relationship with. We know that there are other smaller groups who are looking for accommodation. This seemed a pretty good fit for us to expand the community space and get some space for some other groups. And that is why we went with VSC and DAB. And the lease is with VSC because the particular fund that they were looking to go for, the lottery fund, that was on the basis of them having a long-term lease. Basically, if we were looking to do this, and it was a number of different groups, they would have had to form a management company. That would have taken a huge amount of time as well. So it made sense for there to be one lead organisation, and that, as much as I can say, is the reason behind why we did it. We had to move quickly, and it was just a way of trying to get something in place so that we can expand, take advantage of this rare opportunity for community groups in Ipswich. I think there's a second question, which
DDA. Is it DDA?
DDA. I couldn't answer certainly whether it is fully DDA compliant, but I know that the current owners have put disabled toilets in, and there are ramps certainly in parts of the building. I wouldn't want to swear that the entire building is DDA compliant, but obviously you would imagine that the Disabled Advice Bureau will be pretty hot on this sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad Councillor Ellesmere has pointed out it's a poorly written report, because this is something that over the years, overview and scrutiny, we've always known that we get poorly written reports, and I know we've had a working party on it, and hopefully, maybe in the future, things will improve. My question is, with the fact that you want to rush this through, does this mean that they'll be in by April?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I said it. I didn't say it was a poorly written report. I said it could have been better. And I think any report where we have to move as quickly as this, there is a likelihood that things may be left out. As I've indicated, the reason why the current owners of the building were willing to sell to the council is because we said we could complete by the end of July. I'm pretty certain if we hadn't said that they would not have sold it to us. So it is not a question of the council wanting to rush this through; it's a question of the owners wanting to rush this through. Once we purchase the building, hopefully, if that decision of O&S will allow us to go through, and once the lease has been signed, then obviously I would imagine that the community groups will want to move in as quickly as possible. But basically, as long as they're paying the rent, then that's fine. They will not want to be paying rent on two different premises, because until they move into Argyle Street, then they're going to be paying rent on Town Street, and obviously neither of the organisations will want to do that. So there will be an imperative on them to move. But I don't know currently what their the full details of their plan and when they're intending to move in. But I would be surprised if they were in by April.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not against community centres, and I think the concept is good. But I must say, if I was like a Bangladeshi, and I want a centre like that, you've got to have a vision. You've got to have a vision. And if you're coming to the borough council to be it rent or borrow money and all that, you would be like information as to what they actually want, what they want to achieve there. And in the paperwork that the executives that I've seen, there's nothing about that at all. All it is say so by yourself.
I'm not sure that that's an appropriate question, really, because the Bangladeshis won't enter into a 15-year lease, which is full repairing, unless they've got legal advice. And I assume that that's what they are doing. And just from my point of view, I'd like to think that a schedule of dilapidations has been carried out so that they can fall back on that in case something did go wrong with their occupation. Right, so we've got to the point where, can I say there are no further questions? So now I have to ask Councillor Jenkins for you to summarise, and you have 5 minutes for this exercise.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I got it wrong.
Oh, you got it wrong.
We're just reading the constitution.
It's the portfolio for the followed by these.
Okay.
Yes, I do apologise. Councillor Ellsworth.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've summarised. There are 4 points. The 15-year lease is not against the council's policy for lets. There is no financial risk if lot refunding is not forthcoming. That is not the deal is not reliant on that. We know that there are a number of community groups who are already talking about moving into this building, and we know that space will be freed up in 19 Town Street, which will be suitable for further community groups. So I don't believe it's unfair to other groups. And in terms of reassurance on sublets, the fact that we know there are a number of groups working on this project already, but equally that this will be reflected in the was reflected in paragraph 210 of the report. Chief Executive has confirmed that he will ensure that that those commitments are adequately addressed. So I don't believe that any of the 4 items have got any validity, and I'd just like to reiterate this was something where the council had to move quickly, otherwise we wouldn't secure it. We haven't signed on the dotted line yet. There is still a possibility that this won't go ahead, and if the decision is referred to executive or council, I think there is even more likelihood that it won't go ahead. So, just to summarise, it does give us it does give additional space to two long-established community groups that I think we could all have a lot of trust in. And there is further space on top of that in Argyle Street. It frees up space for smaller groups in 19 Tower Street. The rental income that we get covers the notional borrowing costs on the deal. There is the likelihood, given the track record of the two organisations, that we'll get significant capital investment into the building which we will own. It is more secure. The risk has been spread because there is more than one community group involved. And even, if there are a series of catastrophic failures, at the end of the day, we still have a lease, the ownership of a building, and at the end of the day, we can get our money back. So, as I say, I think this is a very good deal for community organisations in Ipswich. I think, it has been sort of portrayed as though this is something just for the Bangladeshi Support Centre. I think I hope I've highlighted actually the benefits of this particular purchase and the deal are going to be spreading much wider into a much larger group of community organisations than just the one that we signed the lease with. And as I say, I recommend that the committee resolves to allow the executive decision to be implemented without delay.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, can I thank the Chair for intervening? I'm very disappointed that this became a personal thing. I may have mentioned Labour councillors, but that is as a group, not an individual. I'm not under scrutiny here. It's not a calling on past decisions. If I was to bring every decision that I disagreed with here tonight for everybody, we'd have been here all evening. I can't respond to those accusations because this is not what it's about. It's about the item that is on the calling. So I wanted to say that, so thank you, Chair, for that. There are still some things that have not been answered, and actually a couple of contradictions. For instance, Councillor Ellesmere says he's happy to do the same deal with others, but then in another sentence says there's not enough buildings and there's not enough space. So therefore, those other communities did not have the opportunity to bid for this. We have bought other buildings and had a competitive process. The Old Crown Court is one of those examples. It's quite normal practice for a seller to put pressure on a buyer, quite normal practice for agents to do that. It's a way of trying to ensure that you hurry up and do it before you change your mind. So I don't believe for one moment that we would have lost it. However, even if we had decided to buy the building first, which was option 4.2, I believe, in the original executive papers, we could have bought it and done a competitive process. That's my main issue. I don't think it's been answered about the subletting. Who is going to be responsible? How are we going to monitor that? Who is actually going to go in there? Is it the cost versus benefit merit to the community, so that we do use sacred space properly for the benefit of all residents? I agree with Councillor Can that if residents, organisations, everybody thinks this is all absolutely fair and wonderful, I'd be happy as well. All I would like is the opportunity for it to go to council so that we do have that opportunity to be open. I'm not convinced that it was not exempt from calling. I think it may have been overlooked possibly. I'm not convinced it was to be opportunities of being totally open because there's so much missing from the papers. As Councillor Denman, there's so much missing about what's the vision, what is this going to be used for, how are those other groups going to benefit. Someone reading that, I do not believe, for one instance, if we put ourselves in their shoes, that they will read that and go, oh, that was totally fair, that I wasn't consulted or that I wasn't given that opportunity to bid. And if the 15-year grant list is not to be discussed, then I wish Councillor Ellesmere hadn't said it executive. He actually started a sentence saying, it is normal practice, even though it's normal practice for us to only give 5-year leases. Had he not said that, I wouldn't have put that on the calling. That would have not even been included. So all in all, I go back to at least 2 of these being very relevant. Those 2 reasons on their own merit this going to council for a full discussion with all the community groups. And as I say, if they are happy, I am happy. This is about the council's reputation for seeming fair and reasonable, and the financial side I'm perfectly happy with. It's the process. I don't think it's been good enough. I think it's been very amiss in the report. I think rushing through has caused this as well, and I feel now that it's backtracking and trying to defend that decision. So I stand by what I've said, and I ask for this to go to council, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, councillors, for voting very much. I'm afraid I have to leave the room.
I know that, thank you.
I'm told by Mrs. Goodman, one of the that all executive councillors apologies again, but I didn't. Councillor Cannon.
They're really quite more. Well, actually, they're very good. Anyway, I don't know what we're doing. I think Nigel got a point. And that she said she's worried about the process. But she's got a point because basically there isn't actually a procedure for dealing with this sort of scenario. But it doesn't mean that necessarily it's according for it. I think that what we're finding is actually there's a tension here between perception of fairness and speed. Quite rightly, the council's had to act very quickly, and already had a couple of parties that are already willing to do this deal and get this deal done for the great good and great. But the perception left could be, but frankly, I haven't heard of any community groups complaining. Could be, well, that's all happened very quickly, and that's now on closed doors and look at, that particular group's got preferential treatment, whatever. But that's just the nature of doing a quick deal. If councils are want to appear to be fair to everybody, frankly, you're never going to be considered to be fair to everybody. That's not an unrealistic ambition. Then you could have said, well, let's wait on this commercial deal for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. We'll send out a consultation exercise, we do lots of them, don't we? To all the community groups in Ipswich. Do you want any of this building? Oh, by the way, we've got to tick all these boxes and we've got all these interviews and do all these risk assessments, blah, 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 blah. And then we never actually do anything. Sometimes, the executive got to be able to make decisions quickly and act on them, and that might leave a little bit of a bad taste. I think we've got to not worry about that. I don't think the calling was upheld, even though I can see where she's coming from. But the problem point is, the only thing I can suggest we do is we look into that to see if there's anything that can be done. But frankly, I don't think there is. It doesn't make any sense.
Makes perfect sense. Are you pushing a proposal for?
No, I'm just chucking it out there at the moment.
Thanks, Chair. I think the whole call-in process is an important part of the process of modern local government. It is the means by which the executive is from time to time called to account. That's why we're here, and I think that's what we've done this evening. One of the things that has emerged, and I think Councillor Camp touched on it, there are a number of policies which we may, as an O&S committee, decide are worthy of scrutiny in due course. One of them might be the way in which assets are purchased and sold. One of it might be the way in which discounted rents are given to voluntary and community sector tenants, and so on. And a number of these papers are included within the documentation we have tonight. In my own defence, perhaps we should have had the most recent bit of the Constitution that talks about O&S, then I would have referred to the more up-to-date version rather than the out-of-date one that I did refer to. I've listened very carefully to the evidence that's been presented, and I understand that quite clearly everything is not quite as cut and dried as it might be. I used to chair the Ipswich Blind Society, which is a tenant in 19 Tower Street, and I can tell you absolutely unequivocally that it's just about the most unsuitable building for people who are partially sighted, and for elderly to get upstairs in 19 Tower Street is a tortuous exercise. I've seen them do it together with mums who come with pushchairs and young children. But on the basis of the evidence that's been presented, that I've listened to very carefully, I propose the motion, despite the changing words in the current Constitution, that the decision is implemented forthwith and without further delay.
This is in favour, which is
Yes.
what is it?
So that's,
long-winded.
yes, we knew what you meant.
Yeah,
The motion is carried, and thank you all very much indeed for attending the meeting.